Under the harsh glow of live studio lights, a massive black bear suddenly froze, its eyes trembling with a heartbreaking recognition. Seconds later, it tore free from its handler and charged straight toward the host, sending the entire studio into panic. But instead of attacking, the bear sank to its knees and released a soft, trembling cry. A sound meant only for family. No one understood what was happening. No one, except the woman standing before him. To understand that moment, we must go back 5 years, to the day a dying cub was lifted from the ashes and into her arms. By late afternoon, the Bitterroot sky had turned the color of old copper, a smoky dome pressed low over the Montana hills. Emily Carter stepped out of the Forest Service truck and tasted ash on the back of her tongue. That dry, tinny grit she remembered from kitchen matches as a child. She was here for a straightforward piece. Wildfire impacts, interviews with rangers, a few wide shots of blackened timber for the evening broadcast. It was supposed to be a clean story. Nothing about the air or the silence felt clean. Marcus Hale, the district's grizzled chief ranger, led the way with the ease of a man who had memorized the forest by feel. "Stay tight," he said without turning. "Root balls can be hot for days." The younger hand behind him, Jenny Caldwell, kept pace with a nervous energy, helmet bobbing, radio clipped to her vest. Emily carried her camera, but found herself listening more than looking. The soft ticking of cooling branches, the soft crumble of ash under boots, the soft nothing where birdsong should have been. Grief had a sound, and in the woods it sounded like that. They crested a rise where the fire had skated through a pocket of spruce and stalled in a ragged crescent. On the far side lay a shape that didn't belong to the trees. Marcus slowed, lifted a palm, and the three of them stopped together as if pulled by a single thread. A black bear sow lay on her side in the ash, ribs ghosting through scorched fur, one forepaw curled like a question she hadn't finished asking. The wind shifted, and the smell found them, char and musk and something sweet, like syrup burned hard on a stovetop. "Mother," Marcus said quietly. He knelt, touched her shoulder, then closed his hand and pulled it back. "Went down last night, maybe this morning. Heat exhaustion. Smoke." Emily lifted the camera, framing the curve of the animal's flank, the gray smudge of singed ear. The lens fogged with heat and cleared. She should have been thinking about cutaways and stand-ups. Instead, she was thinking about the way the scorched grass around the sow's muzzle lay pressed in two narrow channels, as if something small had been there. Jenny edged left, scanning the log fall beyond. "Marcus," she said, and there it was, so faint that at first Emily mistook it for a branch giving up its ember. A whimper, thin and threadbare, rising and falling as if stitched to the breath of the earth itself. They found him wedged between a blackened snag and a slab of sandstone, a tangle of trembling limbs hardly larger than a farm dog. His coat was soot black where it had not been burned to cinnamon, and his paws were raw crescents of blister. The little bear lifted his head as they approached, more reflex than defiance, and tried to make himself big. The sound that came out wasn't a growl. It was a plea, hoarse and small, a door left open in a house no one lived in anymore. "Easy," Marcus murmured, voice turned to felt. "Hey, little man." He crouched, reading distance the way good rangers do, measuring fear and pain with the tilt of an ear and the set of a jaw. "He's dehydrated, shocky, maybe 8-9 months." Jenny unhooked a canteen, eyes already wet. "We should call Avery. Get the kit down here." Emily lowered her camera. Through the viewfinder, the cub was another scene, one more image to shape into sympathy at 6 o'clock. With the camera down, he was a heartbeat you could hear. She stepped forward, and the cub flinched, wedged harder into stone, then sagged the way the burned trees sagged, like the forest had taught him how to surrender. Marcus lifted a hand toward her without looking. "Careful. If he connects us with pain, he'll blow right through whatever strength he has left." "I'm not going to hurt him," she said. The sentence surprised her with its softness. She took off her jacket, the blue station windbreaker she'd worn all week, and held it open like an awkward hug. Smoke had given the fabric a campfire smell. Coffee had given it her morning. She wished she had something better to offer than both. The cub sniffed, eyelids weighted, nose working the air like a blind man's fingers. Emily lowered the jacket until it brushed his cheek. He pressed into it, a fragile insistence that scattered her good intentions like ash. His paws slid, and he cried once, a rusty hinge of sound that made Jenny look away. "Marcus," Emily said, "we can't leave him." He didn't answer immediately. He set 2 fingers gently on the cub's flank, feeling the thin rise and fall. "Avery will tell you the odds aren't good," he said at last. "Burns on pads are hell. Smoke can hide in a chest. Some nights you do your best and lose him anyway." "Then let's not lose him tonight." Jenny had the radio up and Avery Langston's voice down the line, crisp and close, as if she were standing at Emily's shoulder instead of back at the rescue center. "Celine, oral if he can manage. Honey if you've got it. Get him wrapped. Keep him low and quiet. I'll have a stall prepped." Marcus unsnapped his field pack and produced a squeeze packet that looked like it belonged in a hiker's pocket. Honey, of course, because rangers carry old remedies when new ones take too long to arrive. He dabbed a bit on the cub's tongue. The little mouth worked, confused. Then, hopeful. Emily felt the movement through the jacket, a tiny shiver of want that announced itself without shame. "Good," Marcus said. "There you go." He glanced up at Emily. "If he tries to bite, it'll be from panic, not meanness. Keep his head close to your chest. Heartbeats help." She slid her arms under the cub, and even braced for it, she wasn't ready for the heat radiating off him. The fever warmth of infection. The furnace of the ground still burning a foot below the surface. He weighed less than he should. Suffering trims weight as surely as knives. He made the sound again, softer this time, and his muzzle bumped her sternum, searching. Without deciding to, she tilted her chin and spoke the kind of words you save for infants and the dying. "I've got you, sweetheart. I've got you." The cub went still. Not asleep. Listening. Emily felt the listening in the looseness of his shoulder and the way his breath marked time with hers. Jenny watched as if she were seeing a trick done with mirrors. Marcus only nodded, as if the forest had explained this to him long ago and was pleased to be proven right. They moved together, 3 points of a small procession. The slope down to the truck was cut with root steps and stones the fire had stripped of their green. Twice Marcus stopped them, once to pour a cap of water into the corner of the cub's mouth, once to shift the jacket when the fabric stuck where the burns were weeping. Each time Emily could feel the cub tense, and each time her voice found the narrow bridge back to calm. The jacket smelled more like him now than her. She let it. At the truck, Marcus laid a folded wool blanket on the back seat and helped Emily settle the cub, tucking the jacket around his legs so the pads didn't touch fabric. The animal's eyes slivered open as if to memorize the shape of the cab, then fluttered closed. Emily kept one hand on his ribcage and watched it rise, watched it fall, the way a mother counts breaths in a dark nursery when sleep won't come for either of them. "Shadow," Jenny said suddenly. "Look at him." She smiled through the worry. "He sticks to you like a shadow." Emily didn't smile. The name was a future, and she had learned not to borrow futures from places that burned. Still, the word hung in the cab and softened the edges of the smoke. The road to the rescue center was a ribbon of washboard and switchback. Marcus drove as if speed and mercy were the same thing. Emily's phone buzzed with the producer's questions and the newsroom's insistence, but she let the calls pass. There are hours when careers and deadlines become small enough to set on a shelf and forget until morning. In the back seat, the cub's breath stuttered, then evened. Twice he startled at nothing. Twice her voice smoothed the air. They reached Bitterroot Wildlife Rescue under a sky of falling cinders. Floodlights cut white lanes through the gray, and the place smelled like antiseptic and wet hay. Dr. Avery was already at the bay doors in scrubs and boots, sleeves rolled, hair braided tight against her neck. "Let's see our patient," she said, and the hour loosened something in Emily she hadn't known was clenched. Inside, the exam room was bright as noon, stainless steel gleaming, the table draped and ready. Avery's hands were fast and gentle, a combination that always feels like luck, even when you know it's training. She listened to the chest, peered at the eyes, tested the pads with a touch so light it barely counted as touch. "Second-degree burns on all four," she said. "Some blistering we can lance, some we'll dress and watch. Lungs sound irritated but moving air. He's dehydrated enough to worry me." "Can he make it?" Jenny asked, too quickly, like a child trying to jump past the hard part. Avery's face was the kind that did not lie for comfort. "He can," she said, "if he wants to. Tonight is the hinge." They set an IV. They cleaned the burns and wrapped the paws in white that made him look dainty and breakable. When the first bottle came, goat's milk warmed to the temperature of wanting, Avery tried, then Jenny, then Marcus. The cub turned his face away from all of them, made the sound again, that rasping whimper that felt like it came from the part of the world that still remembered what had been lost. "Let me try," Emily said. Avery didn't move aside immediately. "If he imprints on you," she said, "you won't be able to be casual about this. He'll look for you when you're gone." "I'm here now." Avery nodded and handed over the bottle. Emily sat on the vinyl stool and gathered the cub against her like a question she meant to answer fully. She placed the nipple at the corner of his mouth and spoke very softly. "It's okay. I've got you." The first minutes were all refusal, all stubborn pride, the small dignity of the wild insisting it didn't need charity. Then something in his jaw unlocked, a tired mercy, and he latched. The sound he made as he swallowed was the hum of a house remembering its electricity. His paws flexed against her jacket, and the world contracted to the rhythm of a throat working and the weight of a head that finally felt safe enough to be heavy. Avery turned away to make notes she already knew by heart. Marcus leaned against the door jamb and watched without speaking. Jenny lifted her phone to take a picture and then thought better of it, lowering the device like a person closing a curtain on a private moment. When the bottle was empty, the cub sighed, a grown man's exhale in a child's chest. He nosed under Emily's chin and went still. The IV ticked. The clock on the wall clicked to a new minute. Somewhere outside, a sprinkler hissed against thirsty grass. "Name?" Jenny asked quietly, as if louder would break the spell. Emily looked down at the soot-smudged face, the lashes stuck together with a little dried sap, the ears folded just so. Against her, he was warm and real in a way that would not be undone by morning. "Shadow," she said, before she could stop herself. "His name is Shadow." Marcus straightened, and his smile was the first easy thing she'd seen on his face all day. "All right, Shadow," he said. "Let's make a deal. You do the living, we'll do the helping." Avery drew a blanket over Emily's lap and the small body sleeping there. "We'll set up a nursery stall next door," she said. "He'll need feeds every 3 hours, bandage changes twice a day, and a voice he can trust. You volunteering, Ms. Carter?" Emily felt the old shape of her life, the smooth, efficient routine of flights and scripts and polite goodbyes, tilt on its axis. "Yes," she said, "I am." Night settled around the rescue center like a promise. Smoke thinned to a faint haze, and the moon came up pale as milk glass. Emily stayed in the hard chair with Shadow sleeping on her jacket and counted breaths until she lost the numbers. When she finally slept in short, crooked stitches, she dreamed the forest grew its trees back one ring at a time, and a small dark shape followed her from room to room, close as a second shadow. Dawn slipped into the Bitterroot Valley like a pale ribbon, soft and thin, barely strong enough to pull the night away. In the small nursery room of the Wildlife Center, Emily Carter woke to the slow, rhythmic pull of a tiny body breathing against her chest. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. All she felt was weight, warm, fragile, certain. Then the memories from the night before rose with the light, and she lowered her gaze to the cub curled beneath her chin. Shadow was still asleep, wrapped in her jacket like it had always belonged to him. One paw twitched inside its white bandage, the pads too raw to touch anything but air. Emily lifted a hand and brushed a fleck of soot from his ear. His eyes fluttered, then shut again, as if the world required too much from him so early. A knock came, soft as politeness. Dr. Avery Langston stepped inside, her stethoscope already hanging around her neck. She took in the scene. Emily slumped on the cot, shadow sprawled across her heart, and exhaled through her nose. "He made it through the night," she said. "That's no small thing. Burns like his can tip either way." Emily smoothed the cub's fur. "He ate once. Then he fought sleep like he thought he'd lose something if he closed his eyes." "That's the wild in him," Avery said. She checked fluids, unwrapped one bandaged paw, and nodded. "Swelling's gone down a hair. Pain meds are working." Then she gave Emily a long look, one part curiosity, one part warning. "But this clinginess? That's something else entirely." Emily hesitated. "Is it bad?" "It's not bad," Avery said. "It just means he's decided you're the safest thing in his world. If you're planning to step back, later, don't let him get too anchored." Emily didn't answer. The truth slid around inside her chest like a puzzle piece that didn't yet know where it belonged. The door swung open before she could think more. Marcus Hale entered with 2 mugs of coffee and an expression that suggested he'd slept as poorly as everyone else. "Morning," he said. "Got your caffeine? And his breakfast?" He nodded toward a stainless bowl Jenny carried behind him, warm goat's milk perfumed with honey. Jenny's eyes brightened when she saw the pair on the cot. "Look at him," she whispered. "Like he's glued to you. You weren't kidding about the imprint thing, Avery." Avery only grunted. Emily shifted, easing Shadow upright. His eyes cracked open, cloudy with sleep and pain. When she lifted the bottle, he resisted at first, lowering his head, turning away. But then she said his name. Just that. Shadow. And he latched on, hunger overcoming heartache. Marcus watched the exchange with a look that hovered between amusement and reverence. "He accepts you," he murmured. "There's no training for that. It just happens." Jenny leaned against the counter. "It's like he knows you saved him." Emily almost said no, that she hadn't saved anything, that she'd only been in the wrong place with the wrong story and a jacket that still smelled like smoke. But Shadow's paw flexed against her forearm, and the tiny claws pinched ever so slightly, as if he were reminding her to stay present. For the rest of the morning, the world narrowed to the cadence of recovery. Bandage changes, medicine, warm compresses, another feeding. Shadow whimpered each time Avery touched his pads, but the moment Avery stepped away, he burrowed against Emily's ribs and sighed like a child settling into a mother's arms. Emily tried to maintain the emotional distance she'd been trained for, telling herself she'd leave in a day or two, that this assignment wasn't meant to take root. But the cub kept proving her wrong. By afternoon, he could stand with help. Jenny filmed him wobbling across the padded floor, paws wrapped like tiny snowshoes. Marcus chuckled. "Look at him. Brave little thing." Shadow made a rough sound and half growled at the IV pole, then retreated immediately behind Emily's legs, trembling with more pride than courage. Night found them again, and the nursery lights dimmed. Emily sat on the floor this time, her back against the wall, Shadow crawling into her lap like a creature who had never known another choice. Avery returned with a clipboard, her expression holding the weight of news. "Emily," she said softly, "I need you to understand something. We've reviewed his burns, his lung tests, everything. Even if he pulls through, and I hope he does, He'll never be fully releasable. Smoke damage, paw trauma, conditioning. He'll imprint on humans permanently. Emily brushed her fingers through the cub's fur. What does that mean for him? He'll belong to the center, Avery answered. He'll be cared for, trained, maybe used for educational outreach. But he won't go back to the mountains. He'll look for you more than anyone else. And if you leave suddenly, he'll feel it. Emily tried to steady her breath, but the words caught on the same place her heartbeat did. She didn't want to think 5 steps ahead. She didn't want to imagine a divide between the life she knew and the life she was sliding into without permission. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, his voice steady, reassuring. You're not trapped, Emily, but he's already chosen you. Bears don't make those choices lightly. When a cub loses his mother, he latches onto the next warm, safe thing, and sometimes that bond sticks. Shadow shifted, nuzzling under Emily's chin, warm breath ghosting her collarbone. She closed her eyes, letting the moment settle over her like a blanket she wasn't ready to shrug off. A sudden rattle outside the window made Shadow tense, and he let out a weak growl, the sound of a creature defending what little it had left. Emily stroked him until his shaking eased. Jenny peered out the window. Wind's picking up, storm's rolling in. Good, Marcus said. Rain might help dampen the fire line. Avery sighed. Let's hope it doesn't flood the lower enclosures again. Emily looked down at Shadow, who yawned against her arm. One large, soft yawn that showed tiny white teeth. The kind of yawn an animal only gives when it finally feels safe. Something clicked inside her, quiet, decisive, frightening. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she felt its shape. A mothering something, a belonging something. Later, when the IV was replaced and the cub slept with his nose pressed to the hollow of her throat, Marcus switched off the last overhead light. You've changed his odds, he said from the doorway. Don't underestimate that. Emily nodded. The cot creaked beneath them. Shadow breathed. The storm outside broke open like a wound, rain pattering hard against the tin roof. Long after the others had gone, she whispered into the dark, unsure whether she was speaking to the cub or to herself. I've got you, Shadow, and I don't know what comes next, but I've got you. Shadow stirred, reaching blindly toward her voice, the same way he'd reached toward survival, quiet, unsure, but hopeful. And Emily held him until the rain soothed the last of his trembling. The third winter after the Bitterroot fire was the coldest Emily Carter could remember. Seattle rain had frozen into needles on her apartment window, glittering under the streetlights like 1,000 tiny accusations. She sat at her kitchen table, half-dressed for another news assignment, her phone lit with a new email notification. The sender was always the same, Marcus Hale. She hesitated before opening it. Marcus never wrote unless it concerned the one subject Emily couldn't bear to face directly. Yet she opened it anyway. Shadow is growing well, weight good, curiosity strong, but he still reacts when he hears certain voices. Mostly women from your part of the country. He'll stop whatever he's doing and look toward the gate. Just thought you should know. Emily set the phone down and pressed both hands over her face. It had been nearly 3 years since she'd left Montana. 3 years since she'd walked out of the rescue center before dawn while Shadow slept curled on her jacket, breath warm against her heart. It had been the only way she could do it. If she'd stayed long enough for him to wake and search for her, she never would have made it out of the room. But the decision had left a tear inside her that never fully closed. Her job had become larger, louder, more demanding. She was now a senior correspondent, sent to cover everything from hurricane fallout to political unrest, flying through time zones like a ghost. People called her talented, ambitious, unstoppable. But no one knew that some nights, when jet lag pulled her apart, she swore she felt the faint pressure of small paws on her chest, the weight of a cub who no longer had any reason to remember her. Except Marcus's emails kept proving her wrong. During the second year, he wrote, "He's calmer now. But he still prefers your old jacket. We left it in his enclosure. He drags it around like a security blanket. Avery says it smells like home to him. During the 3rd year, you should hear the sound he makes when he sees a woman with dark hair and a soft voice. It's the same little rattle he made for you. Almost hopeful. And then, one message that made Emily sit down before her knees buckled. He got out again. Scaled the inner wall after someone with a similar voice visited the center. Walked nearly 3 miles before we found him by the river. He wasn't aggressive, just searching. Thought you should know before rumors make it sound worse. Emily stared at the words until they blurred. She had built her life on facts, dates, quotes, verifiable truths. But this wasn't a fact she could categorize. It was something softer, older, more dangerous. The proof that a bear she had cared for as a terrified, half-burned cub still felt her absence like a wound. She returned to Montana 2 years later. Not for Shadow, she told herself, but for a conservation series her network wanted. Yet the moment her flight descended over the Bitterroot Range, she felt her chest tighten the way it had the night she first held Shadow against her. The mountains were greener now. The scar tissue of the fire ran in thin, dark stripes along the hills. But new growth had risen through ash, fir saplings, wild grasses, a few stubborn pines defying the burn. Emily took a long breath at the rental car lot, tasting the same wild scent she had memorized years ago. Smoke lived somewhere under it still, faint as an old story. She drove alone to the Bitterroot Wildlife Rescue. The gravel road felt smaller than she remembered, as if time had folded it inward. When she parked beside the old wooden fence, she sat for several minutes gripping the wheel, unable to move. She wasn't ready. She had spent 5 years wondering whether Shadow remembered her, and now she was terrified to learn the answer. Marcus emerged from the office before she could force herself out. His beard had more gray, his shoulders a little more stooped, but his eyes held the same steady warmth. "You came," he said simply. "I wasn't sure I should." "Maybe you weren't," he replied. "But he's waited long enough." Emily followed him down the path to the northern enclosure, larger than she remembered, with more shade trees and a man-made creek trickling over smooth stones. The wire fencing rose 8 feet high. Behind it, something moved. Shadow. He was enormous now, nearly 200 pounds. The soft cub replaced by a muscular, thick-shouldered bear with a coat the color of midnight. He stood with an ease that was almost regal, head slightly lowered as he sniffed at a log. A trace of sun caught in his fur, turning it blue-black. Emily gripped the fence post to steady herself. "He looks unreal." "He looks like a bear," Marcus said. "But he's still Shadow. Under everything." A different employee approached, Owen Briggs, the new operations manager. His uniform was crisp, his posture impatient. "If she's the visitor you warned me about," he said to Marcus, "we need to keep distance. He's unpredictable with certain triggers." Marcus bristled. "He's not dangerous. He gets overstimulated, not violent." Owen folded his arms. "Close enough." Emily barely heard them. Shadow had lifted his head. He hadn't seen her yet, but he smelled something. Familiar. Impossible. Old. His ears twitched. His body stilled. He turned slowly, like a compass needle rediscovering true north. Emily stepped closer despite Owen's warning. Her voice came out thin, trembling. "Shadow." The world narrowed to a single moment. Shadow froze. His breath hitched. His muscles locked, then rippled. Emily saw recognition flash across his face. Wild, disbelieving, aching. Then he ran. Not with the lumbering gait of a grown bear, but with the desperate, stumbling urgency of the cub she once fed at midnight. His paws pounded the earth, scattering dust. He reached the fence and pressed his entire body against it, letting out a sound that tore straight through Emily. A low, tremulous rumble, the same sound he had made when he was small and afraid and searching for her heartbeat. Emily dropped to her knees. Her hands found the cold metal of the fence, and Shadow pushed his nose through, trying to reach her skin. His breath came in short, frantic bursts. He pawed the ground, not in aggression, but longing. "He remembers me," she whispered. Marcus swallowed hard. He never forgot. But Owen stepped forward, voice sharp. "This is exactly the issue. He's imprinted too deeply. It's not safe." Shadow growled. Not at Emily, not at Marcus, but at Owen, the stranger blocking his view. Emily placed her palm against the fence, close to his snout. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, using the same tone she'd used the night she carried him from the fire. "I'm right here." Shadow melted against the metal, eyelids fluttering, a sound escaping him that was closer to relief than anything animalistic. 5 years had passed, years that had reshaped him into a creature of power and instinct. But beneath all that strength, his heart had kept a map her voice could unlock. Emily stayed there until the sun dipped low, until Shadow's frantic energy softened into something tender. When she finally rose, Marcus touched her shoulder. "There's something you need to know before you leave," he said quietly. He didn't just react to voices. He never stopped looking for you. Owen shook his head in irritation, but Marcus continued anyway. "There were nights," he said, "when he'd sit by the gate for hours. If a woman came by with your accent, he'd stand up and watch her until she walked away. And the day he escaped, he followed the road to the ridge, the same route you took when you left." Emily felt her throat tighten. Shadow pressed his paw through the lowest gap in the fencing, searching for her again, as if afraid she might vanish the moment she stepped back. "I'm here now," she whispered. "I'm here." Shadow rumbled, deep and certain. And Emily realized, with a clarity that shook her, that this was not just reunion. It was unfinished belonging. A tether pulled taut across 5 long, silent years. The studio lights in Portland glowed with that strange, polished brightness unique to live television. Too warm for comfort, too cold to feel real. Emily Carter adjusted the microphone clipped to her collar and tried to slow her breathing. The segment was simple on paper. A discussion on wildlife conservation, followed by the appearance of an ambassador bear from the Bitterroot Center. She had done hundreds of live broadcasts, some under gunfire, some in hurricanes. But none had rattled her the way tonight did. Because somewhere behind the closed doors of the loading bay, a bear was pacing. A bear who once fit in the crook of her arm. A bear she had not been warned about. Technicians hurried around her in a dance of cables and counts. The floor manager lifted a hand. 90 seconds, he called. "We're live everywhere." Emily forced a smile. Her heart didn't listen. The guest chair beside her sat empty for now. Owen Briggs was scheduled to join her to introduce the ambassador bear. His disapproving voice from the day before still echoed in memory. "His attachment to you is a liability, not a bond." But Marcus's truth had echoed louder. He never stopped looking for you. Emily folded her hands together on the desk, feeling the faint tremor beneath her skin. The past 5 years lived in that tremor. 5 years of wondering, doubting, aching for something she had convinced herself she shouldn't want. The floor manager lifted another finger. 30 seconds. She straightened. A door creaked somewhere behind the cameras. A low sound drifted through the studio. A rumble, barely audible, but it rolled through her like distant thunder. Emily's heart jumped against her ribs. She knew that sound. She had known it since the nights she fed a burned cub goat's milk in the glow of a dim nursery lamp. The red light on camera 1 blinked alive. In 3, 2, 1. The anchor in New York cued her in. We go now to our correspondent in Portland, Emily Carter, with a special look at wildlife rehabilitation. Emily began speaking, her voice steady only by muscle memory. Thank you, Mark. Tonight we're joined by the Bitterroot Wildlife Center to discuss the challenges. Another sound cut through her words. A deeper rumble. Closer. Needful. The studio crew turned. Owen Briggs appeared at the edge of the set, leading a massive black bear by a steel-reinforced training collar. But the bear wasn't walking beside him. He was pulling him. Each step heavy, urgent, purposeful. Emily's breath caught. Shadow. His fur shone under the studio lights, thicker now, darker than any night sky. He stood nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, muscle rippling with each stride. His burned pads had healed long ago, leaving only faint scars beneath the fur. But his eyes, those warm, amber-flecked eyes, had not changed at all. He saw her. The moment was a fault line opening. The bear froze, chest heaving, nostrils flaring, as if the air had suddenly remembered her scent. His head tilted, just slightly, the way he used to tilt it when he was too weak to lift it fully. A soft, trembling whine escaped him. Emily's voice failed. A syllable stuttered out. Unfinished. Shh. Shadow moved first. With a force that ripped the training leash from Owen's hands, he lunged, not wildly, not violently, but with the unstoppable certainty of a creature who had waited too long. Metal clamps clattered to the floor. Studio assistants backed away, hands flying to their mouths. The New York anchor's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Emily? Everything all right?" But she didn't answer. Shadow was coming toward her. A tech reached instinctively for a tranquilizer pole. Marcus, who had slipped into the studio without her noticing, grabbed the man's arm before metal could touch metal. "Don't," he said. "Watch." Emily rose slowly from her chair. The cameras adjusted upward. Her heart pounded so hard she wondered if the microphones would pick up the sound. "Shadow." Her voice trembled like the first time she held him. "Hey, sweetheart." The bear closed the last few feet in a slow, deliberate walk, as if afraid she might vanish. He lowered himself onto his forelegs and pressed his massive head against her torso, the same way he had once pressed a much smaller head into her jacket the night he was nearly lost. A sound filled the studio, not a growl, not a warning, but a rolling, grateful rumble that shook through her bones. Emily set her hands on either side of his face, fingers sinking into the thick fur. Shadow leaned harder. People watching from home would later describe the moment as if time itself had paused. Emily bent her head, eyes blurring, and whispered, "I'm here. I'm right here." The floor manager wiped at his face. Even Owen Briggs, rigid as an iron gate, seemed to wilt. Shadow nudged her with the side of his jaw, making a soft, rhythmic chuffing sound. He didn't care that cameras were trained on him. He didn't care that millions were watching. For him, the world had narrowed to one voice, one scent, one person. Emily lifted her head and looked directly into the camera's bright, unblinking eye. Her voice broke only once. "This," she said softly, "is what survival looks like. Not the claws, not the strength, this. A bond that fire couldn't burn out, time couldn't erode, and distance couldn't break." Shadow huffed again, as if agreeing. The anchor in New York didn't speak for several seconds. When he finally did, his voice was thick. "Well, I think we've just witnessed something extraordinary." When the broadcast ended, the lights dimmed, and the crew slowly filtered out. Shadow refused to leave Emily's side. Marcus approached with a knowing smile. "He interrupted the whole show just to get to you," he said. "I think he's made his point." Emily stroked the bear's cheek. "What am I supposed to do now?" Marcus cleared his throat. "Well, the center has been talking. We need a full-time media liaison. Someone who understands the animals, someone the animals trust, someone he trusts." He gestured toward Shadow, whose eyes had already drooped half-closed under Emily's touch. Owen stepped forward, less combative now. "He won't accept anyone else," he admitted. "For him, you're it." Emily looked down at Shadow, her broken cub, her shadow in the dark, her unfinished goodbye. He lifted his head and nudged her hand, as if casting the deciding vote. By evening, she had given her answer. Weeks later, when Emily moved into a small cabin on the sanctuary grounds, Shadow was waiting at the fence, paws planted, breath puffing through the cold air. He trotted beside her as she walked along the boundary, his steps matching hers like a promise renewed. And in the months that followed, when two orphaned cubs arrived from a highway rescue, tiny, trembling things with soot still in their fur, they toddled straight to Emily. One curled at her feet, the other climbed clumsily into her lap. Shadow watched from a few yards away, then lumbered closer, settling himself beside her with a heavy sigh, resting his huge head against her shoulder as if he approved. It was not the life Emily had planned. It was better. Because some stories do not end at the moment of rescue. Some stories end in return, in choosing and being chosen back, in a family you never expected, one built on fire, loss, memory, and a bond that reached across 5 long years to find its way home. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Just leave a simple 0 or 1 in the comments so I know you're here, listening and feeling these moments with us. And if you'd like to join me for more stories like this, stories of courage, compassion, and the incredible bond between humans and wildlife, please hit subscribe and stay with the channel. More unbelievable journeys are coming next, and I'd be honored to have you with us when they arrive.